Hey folks, I've got the weekly update, which is kind of now actually the two-weekly update. So I want to go back to last week, and the two major bills that we considered was H.R. 987, which is called the More Health Education Act. This is really disappointing. What this is designed to do, and it put a series of bills together regarding prescription drugs and the cost of prescription drugs, including a bill that I co-sponsored called the CREATES Act. But this is H.R. 987. And what is, among other things, this is supposed to do is to stop the delaying tactics by the drug manufacturers when a drug goes to be generic. So what they do is they delay, because there's a requirement once the patent runs out, they're required to give or to allow the generic company to purchase so much of the drug so that they can figure the formula out. And of course they delay that, and we want to stop that so that the drug can go generic more quickly and become more affordable. So this is a good thing. And believe it or not, that passed out of committee as it should, almost, I think probably completely bipartisan. But then what Ms. Pelosi did was she put requirements in there to save Obamacare. And let me tell you about a couple of the requirements. Hundreds of millions of dollars to prop up, if you recall, the state navigators. And understand, under the state navigator system, the average cost for a navigator for an insurance plan was about $750. $750 to pay a navigator. Meanwhile, the private market was doing it for about $2.42. So that was a problem. The other is the state co-ops, if you remember those, of which zero of them are still in business. They all went bankrupt, but yet we were in the bill. They had added hundreds of millions of dollars to start that whole requirement again and pay for things that went bankrupt, didn't work, and were just wildly expensive. So it's playing politics with the worst thing, which is people's health care, where most of us, literally almost every single Democrat and Republican, agreed with lowering the cost of prescription drugs, but they put that poison pill in there. So it passed anyhow, but I voted against it because I'm not for spending hundreds of millions of dollars on things that don't work. And then there's the Equality Act, which in my opinion should be called the Inequality Act. I voted against it, and essentially it was about sex and gender equality. But let me tell you what else it did. So if you're a parent and you have a child who says at any age that they want to change their gender, and you say, I'm the parent, I think you ought to wait until you're 18, let's discuss this, and you disagree, the child can go to the practitioner, force the practitioner to do the surgery or what have you, and if you, as the parent or the practitioner, disagree and try and stop the child, both the practitioner and the parent can be thrown in jail. These are children, mind you. These are children that aren't of age to vote, can't sign a check or have a checking account, can't do a multitude of things, drive a car, what have you, that children can't do. Yet they could determine their sex selection, and the parent and the doctor would be forced to accept it. And I just think that among other things, is horrifically wrong, and requires more thoughtful consideration. Also, just like in the Violence Against Women Act bill, domestic violence shelters wouldn't be able to choose how they care for the people that come to the domestic violence shelter, and literally a woman could be placed in a place where a biological man who says, I identify as a woman, might even literally be the person that abused her, housed with the same person. It's completely unacceptable. And then, of course, the religious freedom aspect. And again, we all take an oath. We raise our right hand to the Constitution. And if you have religious objections, let's say you run a religious charity, you would be forced to hire and employ people that fall into this category that you had religious objections to, or a church for that matter. They would be forced under federal requirements. It's just completely unconstitutional. So I voted no on that. It's not the Equality Act, it's the Inequality Act, and it's again another one of these things that, in my opinion, is it's not going anywhere in the Senate. Has zero chance, and it's just for partisan. It's for show. It's for campaign ads in about a year and a half. Now let's fast forward to this week. We actually had a pretty good week on some bipartisan stuff. We had the female genital mutilation resolution, which is offered by myself, and a lady named Lois Frankel from Florida, and that's a bipartisan bill that passed out of the committee in a bipartisan fashion and passed on the floor in a bipartisan fashion. So that's great. We also had the Bipartisan Secure Act, which I'll talk to you a little bit about. We had the classified Iran briefing, which I'm going to talk about obliquely, but not about the classified portion, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about the White House transportation and infrastructure issue. We also had the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage this week. And so let's just start with the FGM, or female genital mutilation resolution. This, again, was offered by myself and Representative Lois Frankel from Florida. It's House Resolution 106, and it condemns the practice of female genital mutilation, or often known as cutting. And again, it passed out of the House of Representatives, so this is not just committee, this is off the floor. It's headed to the Senate unanimously. So that is a great achievement and accomplishment, and we're excited for that. We also passed the Bipartisan Secure Act, which sets every community up for retirement enhancement and enhances the employer's ability to provide retirement accounts for their employees, allows employees to take from their retirement account without penalty if they adopt a child or have a child. A whole multitude of things, including fixing a problem in the tax code regarding the Gold Star families. And of course, we're going into Memorial Day, so this is really important. So this is a great bill. Again, I'm a co-sponsor of it. Now, one thing that it did, that of course I think we're playing politics here, is that in the original bill that passed out of the committee unanimously, bipartisan Republicans and Democrats unanimously, allows parents to use their 529 plans to pay for key education expenses. Again, this is a tax code bill, and the Speaker took that provision out of the bill and put it on the floor. I voted for it. I was a co-sponsor, but there's just no reason to take that out of it. And it was trying to get Republicans to vote no on it, and it's just so unfortunate, in my opinion. It's just continued partisanship. So we tried to add an amendment on the floor regarding the BDS activities, the anti-Israel activities, and it's the anti-boycott provisions. Boycott, divest, and sanction is what its BDS is short for. We added that as an amendment. It was not approved by the majority party. It was a party line vote, and so we gave it a shot. It didn't work out. So,
but what's it supposed to do?
So it's, again, tax code. So if you support the BDS movement in America, or companies overseas that support the BDS movement, you would be penalized for it. So we don't want Israel. It's similar to, we sanction companies that deal with terrorist organizations or terrorist countries. Okay. Right. It's the same setup. So we don't want companies engaging in the boycott, divest, and sanction movement with Israel.
Got it.
And we have the bill out there, and I don't know who's for sanctioning and boycotting and divesting just because it's the country Israel. But there are people, and we unfortunately couldn't get that passed. All right, so let's move on to the classified briefing on Iran. Both Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate got a classified briefing from the intelligence agencies and the Secretary of State on our activities in the Persian Gulf regarding it's regarding our response. And it's very important that you know that it's a response to the intelligence that is verified and multi-sourced on Iran's activities or proposed activities. You already probably know about their activities vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, the tankers, the pumping facilities, the explosions, and so on and so forth. And we had actionable intelligence that they were targeting Americans and American interests. And so this is a response to that. And of course, we got a briefing on the intelligence that led to our response. And from my standpoint, of course, Iran took Americans hostage, as many of you know, 40 years ago. They're responsible for the Beirut, the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, and they're responsible for the untimely and unfortunate deaths of 500 of our military service members in Iraq. This is Iran through a thing called the EFP, the explosive form penetrator that was devised in Iran. They're a malign actor. They obviously are an enemy of the United States. And what's happening is the sanctions pressure that's being put on them it's debilitating. It's having a great impact on the leadership and the regime of Iran, and they don't like it. And so they're lashing out and they're trying to threaten the United States in a way to try and get the sanctions relief. The president is determined that Iran will not and should not have nuclear weapons and needs to stop its terrorist activities via proxies in Syria, in Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas, in Venezuela, etc. We want them to stop that stuff, and we're going to sanction them until they stop it. That's where we are. They don't want to stop it, and so they're lashing out, and we're responding to their lashing out. So that's the briefing on Iran. The White House Transportation Challenge. I think I talked to you this a couple weeks ago when the leaders from the Democrats, both House and Senate, went to talk to the president about the Transportation and Infrastructure Bill. I'm on that committee, and I think I told you at the time I didn't expect much, and I thought the whole thing was kind of a ruse, and it kind of came to fruition this week. Folks, we're talking about $2 trillion in spending, and allegedly what the meeting was today was about what kind of projects and where the money's coming from. Congress and the federal government has no problem spending your money, and we have a multitude of transportation and infrastructures across the country that are legitimately in need of attention, and they do cost money. My point is that we don't really need a list of how we're going to spend $2 trillion. We need to know how we're going to pay for it. Democrats and Republicans, and unless you're willing to get into that discussion, it's just unserious. And coming from Pennsylvania, as you probably know, we pay the highest gas tax, the highest fuel tax in the country. And so this accusing the president of covering something up and not even saying what he's covering up, and then going a half an hour later, going over to the White House and acting like, oh, we're just going to talk about this bipartisan figuring out how we're going to spend $2 trillion and just disregard the fact that we just accused you of essentially criminal activity. It's ridiculous. Either we want to do something or we don't. And I think the president's right. If you want to relitigate the Mueller investigation and say that he colluded with Russia and he's treasonous and he's a traitor and so on and so forth, that's Nancy Pelosi's prerogative. But he said, as long as you're going to do that, I can't get serious with you about these things that you're not serious about. And so unfortunately, just like I told you, I don't think we're going to have a transportation bill this session. I just don't think it's going to happen. So that's unfortunate, but that's kind of where we are. Again, celebrated 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage in House Resolution 354, and just wanted to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Finally, I just want to wish everybody a meaningful Memorial Day, which you know is upcoming, and let's just remember what this is about. This is time to set aside some thoughts and some prayers for those who have borne the battle and lost their lives in defense of freedom and the defense of our country for ages over. And so I just hope you will think about it in those terms. It is a great time to be with your family and so on and so forth, but you might just, if you know somebody who has served or is serving, it's an opportunity, of course, to thank them for their service, but it's also more an opportunity to think about those who have fallen in the line of duty. And so just think about it in those ways. Again, it's not a time to say Happy Memorial Day. It's a time of meaningful reflection about the cost and the very, very dear cost of freedom. And so with that, we'll talk to you after the next session week. Thank you.